The actor visited the children at the Donostia University Hospital in San Sebastián, Spain on Thursday, September 26th. He played with patients admitted to the pediatrics and oncology wards.
Johnny Depp's surprise visit to a young girl battling terminal illness is a story you won't forget. What he did in her final days will leave you deeply moved. 12-year-old Clara Morgan's life changed in an instant. One moment, she was a happy, energetic girl who loved painting and playing the violin. Next, she was battling for her life. What started as fatigue and bruises that wouldn't heal turned into endless doctor visits and tests. Then came the devastating diagnosis. Clara had an aggressive form of leukemia. Her parents, Emily and Jason, were heartbroken. They'd held on to hope that it was something minor, something treatable, but the reality hit them like a tidal wave. Through it all, Clara kept her head high. "I'm going to fight," she told her mom after the first round of chemo. "I'm not giving up, but what happened next will restore your faith in humanity." But the fight was brutal. The treatments were grueling. The days stretched into weeks, then months, as Clara's body grew weaker. Her long brown hair fell out, her laughter became rare, and her once vibrant energy faded. Yet even in the darkest moments, Clara found comfort in unexpected places, like her favorite movies and the actor who brought them to life, Johnny Depp. Clara had always been a fan of Johnny Depp's movies, from the whimsical Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to the adventurous Pirates of the Caribbean. But during her treatment, those films became more than entertainment. They became her escape. "He's so funny, and he always plays these unique characters," she told her mom one evening as they watched Pirates of the Caribbean for the 100th time. "But I think he's really kind too, in real life. You can just tell." Emily smiled, grateful for anything that could bring her daughter even a little joy. Over time, Clara's admiration for Johnny Depp grew into something deeper. She started watching interviews with him on YouTube, learning about his struggles and how he always seemed to treat people with kindness. "He's been through so much, but he doesn't let it make him bitter," Clara explained to her dad one night. "I want to be like that." As Clara's illness progressed, the treatment stopped working. Her doctors sat Emily and Jason down to tell them the news no parent ever wants to hear. There wasn't much time left. They did their best to break the news gently, but no amount of words could soften the blow. When Emily told Clara, her little girl didn't cry or ask why. Instead, she nodded and said, "I just want to make the most of the time I have." And then, after a pause, she added quietly, "Do you think I could meet Johnny Depp?" Emily's heart broke all over again. Of course, she wanted to make it happen for Clara. But how? Johnny Depp was a world-famous actor. It wasn't like she could just call him up. But Emily was determined. She started by sharing Clara's story on social media, explaining her daughter's love for Johnny and her wish to meet him. The post quickly went viral, touching thousands of hearts. People shared it, commented, and tagged anyone they thought might have a connection to Johnny Depp. Meanwhile, Johnny Depp was at home in Los Angeles. He wasn't working on any films at the time, taking a rare break from his busy schedule. One afternoon, as he was scrolling through emails and messages, his assistant forwarded him a link to Clara's story. Johnny clicked on it and read every word. He learned about Clara's battle with leukemia, her unshakable spirit, and her love for his films. By the time he finished, he felt a lump in his throat. He sat quietly for a moment, thinking about what he'd just read. Johnny wasn't a stranger to loss or pain. He'd faced his own struggles over the years, both personally and professionally. But something about Clara's story struck him deeply. Here was a young girl, facing the unimaginable, and yet she still found hope and comfort in the stories he'd helped bring to life. Without hesitation, Johnny picked up his phone. "Let's make this happen," he told his team. A few days later, Emily got the call she had been praying for. "Johnny Depp wants to meet Clara," said a woman from his team. Emily could hardly believe it. "Are you serious?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. The visit was arranged quickly and kept private. Johnny didn't want any media attention or fanfare. This wasn't about publicity. It was about making a little girl's wish come true. When Emily told Clara the news, her eyes lit up like they hadn't in weeks. "He's really coming?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily said, holding her hand. "He's coming just to see you." The day finally arrived, Clara was weak, confined to her hospital bed, but her excitement was palpable. She'd even asked the nurse to help her put on her favorite scarf, the one with tiny pirate ships on it. Stay tuned to see the heartwarming moment when Clara and Johnny Depp meet for the first time. You won't want to miss it. Johnny arrived at the EO hospital dressed simply in jeans, a t-shirt, and his signature accessories, rings on his fingers and a fedora on his head. He was nervous, though he wouldn't admit it. Meeting Clara wasn't just another fan encounter. It was deeply personal. A nurse led him down the hallway to Clara's room. When he walked in, Clara's eyes widened and a huge smile spread across her face. "You're here," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. Johnny smiled back and walked over to her bedside. "Of course I'm here," he said, pulling up a chair. "I've heard so much about you, Clara. You're quite the fighter, aren't you?" They talked for over an hour. Clara told Johnny about her love for painting and how she'd always wanted to visit the Caribbean. "Maybe I'll get to be a pirate in my next life," she joked, and Johnny laughed. He told her stories from the sets of his movies, sharing funny moments and little behind-the-scenes secrets. "You know," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "Jack Sparrow wasn't supposed to be so wobbly, but I thought, why not make him a little drunk all the time?" Clara giggled, and for a moment, it was like all her pain had melted away. As their visit came to an end, Johnny stood up and leaned over to give Clara a hug. Her small arms wrapped around him as tightly as they could. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Johnny hugged her back, his eyes glistening. "Thank you for letting me," he said softly. In that moment, it wasn't about movies or fame. It was about human connection. A man who had touched millions of lives, and a little girl who had reminded him what really mattered. As Johnny pulled back from the hug, he held Clara's hand gently. Her fingers were frail but warm, and her eyes, though tired, sparkled with gratitude. "You've been so brave," Johnny said. "More brave than any pirate I've ever known." Clara smiled, her cheeks flushing faintly. "Do you think I'd make a good pirate?" she asked. Johnny grinned. "The best, but only if I could be in your crew." The two laughed softly, the sound filling the room with a warmth that had been missing for months. Emily, standing by the door, couldn't hold back her tears. She hadn't seen her daughter this happy in so long. Before leaving, Johnny took something out of his bag, a small, weathered compass. Clara's eyes lit up as he placed it in her hands. "This," Johnny said, "is a compass that doesn't point north. It points to the thing you want most in life. It's not from the movies. It's my own little treasure, and I want you to have it." Clara stared at the compass, her fingers tracing its edges. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Johnny leaned in closer and spoke softly. "Whenever you're feeling lost, just hold this and remember, you're never alone, Clara. You've got so many people who love you, and they'll always keep you in their hearts." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. She held the compass close to her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. After Johnny left, the hospital room felt different, not heavier with sadness, but lighter. Clara's joy from the visit lingered, infusing the air with a strange peace. The next few days were some of Clara's best in months. She spoke about Johnny constantly, recounting their conversation to every nurse and visitor. "Did you know he wanted to be a musician before he became an actor?" she told her doctor, beaming. "He said he'd play guitar for me if he ever comes back." But as time passed, Clara's condition worsened. Her energy waned, and she began to sleep more than she was awake. Even so, the compass stayed by her side. One evening, as Emily sat by her daughter's bed, Clara stirred and opened her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "I'm not scared anymore. Do you think Johnny would remember me?" Emily kissed her daughter's forehead. "Oh, sweetheart, he'll never forget you. None of us will." Clara smiled faintly. "Good. I'll be watching over you all, like a real pirate captain." Clara passed away peacefully the next morning, surrounded by her family. She held the compass in her hands until the very end. The hospital staff, who had grown close to Clara, were deeply moved. Many of them had witnessed Johnny Depp's visit and saw the profound impact it had on her. That visit gave her something we couldn't, one nurse said later. It gave her hope and peace. Emily and Jason decided to honor their daughter's memory by sharing her story. They wanted the world to know how much joy Johnny had brought to Clara during her final days. He didn't just meet her, Emily explained in an interview. He made her feel seen, heard, and loved. That's something we'll never forget. For Johnny Depp, the visit to Clara's hospital room stayed with him long after she was gone. He thought about her often, replaying their conversations in his mind. Her courage, humor, and unshakable spirit had left a mark on him. What he said next will make you cry. She was extraordinary, Johnny said in a rare public statement. Clara reminded me of the importance of finding joy, even in the hardest times. Meeting her was an honor, and it's something I'll carry with me forever. To honor Clara, Johnny quietly made a donation to the hospital where she had been treated, ensuring that other children facing similar battles would have access to the care and support they needed. Clara's story spread far and wide, inspiring people around the world. Her bravery in the face of unimaginable challenges touched hearts, and her connection with Johnny Depp showed the power of kindness and human connection. Emily and Jason established a foundation in Clara's name, dedicated to supporting children with terminal illnesses and fulfilling their last wishes. At its first fundraiser, Emily spoke to a crowd of supporters, holding up the compass Johnny had given Clara. "This compass symbolizes hope," she said. "It reminds us to keep moving forward, even when we feel lost." Clara believed in that, and she wanted others to believe in it too. The foundation's work brought joy and comfort to countless families, and Clara's memory lived on in the hearts of everyone who heard her story. After Clara passed, the room felt impossibly still. Emily and Jason sat quietly by her bedside, their hands intertwined as they tried to absorb the loss. Clara had been their light, their joy, their everything. Though they knew this moment was coming, it didn't make it any easier. For days after, Emily found herself replaying Clara's final conversation with Johnny Depp. It brought her both heartache and comfort. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Clara had smiled, how she had laughed despite her frailty, and the way she had held onto the compass as if it were a lifeline. Emily sat on the couch with the compass in her hands, running her fingers over its edges. Jason walked in and saw her lost in thought. "She was so happy," he said softly, sitting beside her. "She really was," Emily whispered. "That visit, it gave her so much peace. It felt like she let go of all her fear after that." Jason nodded, his eyes misty. "I think Johnny gave her something we couldn't. A kind of understanding. She saw herself in him, in his strength." 2 weeks after Clara's funeral, Emily sat at the dining table, lost in thought. The house was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She couldn't stop thinking about the impact Johnny's visit had on Clara during her final days. The memory of Clara's smile, her excitement, and the peace that visit brought her filled Emily's heart with both gratitude and sorrow. She felt an overwhelming urge to express her thanks. Picking up a pen, she tried to find the right words to capture how much that moment had meant. She wanted Johnny to know that what he had done wasn't just a kind gesture. It was a lifeline. His visit had given Clara courage, joy, and the strength to face her fears. As Emily wrote, her hand trembled, her tears occasionally blurring the ink. It wasn't just about gratitude. It was about making sure Johnny knew he had helped Clara feel seen and loved in her most vulnerable moments. And for a little girl who had been through so much, that was everything. When she finished, she placed the letter in an envelope. She wasn't sure if she would ever send it, but writing it down helped her process the depth of what had happened. It was her way of honoring Clara's memory and the kindness that had brought her peace. Emily sealed the letter, unsure if she'd ever send it. But simply writing it felt like releasing a part of her grief. In the weeks following Clara's passing, the nurses and doctors who had cared for her shared their own stories about her with Emily and Jason. "She was the bravest patient I've ever known," one nurse said. "Even on her hardest days, she found a way to make us laugh. And after Johnny's visit, she talked about him constantly. She called him her pirate friend." Hearing this brought bittersweet smiles to Emily and Jason's faces. Though they hadn't planned it, Clara's story began to spread. A social media post from one of the hospital staff described the moment Johnny Depp entered Clara's room and how her face had lit up with joy. The post went viral, drawing attention to Clara's journey and the importance of supporting children facing terminal illnesses. Emily and Jason were initially hesitant about the publicity, but they realized it was a way to honor Clara's life. Her story, they hoped, would inspire others to find strength in connection and kindness.